Since they were first introduced in October of 2001, the Huber banjos have been rapidly making a name for themselves among serious banjo players, and especially fans of that elusive pre-war banjo sound. One such Huber convert is Lonesome River Band banjoist Sammy Sheeler, the four-time winner of the Banjo Player of the Year award from the International Bluegrass Music Association.
The first time I played a Huber banjo, I was extremely impressed with the way it sounded right out of the box. It had richness and an open sound that you hear very seldom in a new banjo, and a very even sound all the way up and down the neck.
The Huber banjo is the brainchild of Steve Huber, a banjo player with a lifelong passion for the instrument and the sound, look, and feel of the classic flathead banjos that were made in the 1930s. The very instruments that we used for the early recordings that formed the foundation for all the bluegrass music that has followed. In discussing vintage stringed instruments, the term pre-war is one that has developed an almost mystical aura about it. Among those who long for the crystalline banjo tone associated with those seminal bluegrass recordings, the words are pronounced with a care and reverence that may often exist without a clear understanding of what made those older instruments so special. The early part of the 20th century was the heyday of sorts for banjo builders. The instrument was used in a number of popular musical styles, though the four-stringed tenor banjo was far more common than the five-string, and most were made with a raised head or arch-top tone ring. A great many design innovations and patent registrations surround the building of banjos. By the late 1920s, the tone ring resonator banjo that we know today was fully evolved. Steady sales kept a number of prominent banjo factories chugging along, and serious collectors regard the tone ring banjos that were built during the 1930s as perhaps the finest ever made. With the entry of the United States into World War II, late in 1941, the production of banjos dropped by as much as 2/3. Access to crucial materials, both the wood and the metal, were restricted during the wartime years. Many prominent instrument manufacturers dedicated part of their production capacity and workforce to the war effort. Some banjos were produced during the war, and many were quite good, as they were most often assembled from parts already in inventory prior to the materials restrictions going into effect. Regular production of banjos resumed in earnest in the late 1940s, but many of the specifications, as well as the composition of the various components, were of a different type and quality. The resulting difference in tone, which may not have been intentional, is certainly striking to our ears today.
Well, the pre-war flatheads have a very unique and distinctive sound to them. The highs and lows are very present, and it's very even up and down the neck, and they just kind of have a rattly sound to them. And when you play one, you really know it.
What I've always kind of described the pre-war sound as is having even texture from the lowest D string all the way up to the highest notes. And this banjo has that. It has the bells up the neck, but it still has a thickness to it that kind of just has a growl.
So how did Steve Huber capture and reproduce this elusive pre-war sound where others had failed in the past? A lot of it has to do with his prior training and experience as a machinist and a mechanical engineer, plus his practical experience in manufacturing and production. A lot still is owed to his determination to get it right.
So I wanted to find out why the old banjos sounded different than the new banjos, and I discovered that a lot of it is in the tone ring. So I figured, well, that's where we got to start. So let's make a tone ring identical to the pre-war tone rings. So I analyzed samples of quite a few pre-war tone rings to find out the exact alloy of the ring. If we're going to make banjos that sound the same as the old ones, we got to start with the right alloy.
Drawing on his training in mechanical engineering and metalwork, Steve took the chemical analysis of those pre-war rings and had several hundred pounds of metal poured over many months of testing and tweaking until he obtained a pour with the exact alloy he was after. A perfect metallurgical replica of the pre-war rings that he'd sampled.
We also cast them, sand cast them, the same as they did in the 30s. And the whole idea here is to make a tone ring that's exactly the way they made it in the 1930s. It's not really magic, but it has to be done right. And we keep our quality control on each tone ring we make today the same as the pre-war tone rings.
The Huber tone ring, often called the vintage flathead, was introduced to market in 1998. Quickly was receiving rave reviews from both professional and amateur players for its responsiveness and tonal accuracy as compared to the older flatheads. Then, as now, Steve was turning and plating each ring himself to ensure that the specifications were on the money each time, and to allow him to modify the ring cut as needed to fit them to an existing rim. Many of these Huber tone rings went into pre-war conversions, older banjos that had either been made without a tone ring or had started their life as archtops and were now being converted with a flathead ring.
Well, once I was convinced that the tone ring alloy was right and the rings sounded great, and I was getting some feedback from pro players, and we were putting them in some old pre-war conversions, and for the most part we nailed the alloy and nailed the ring, I decided that it's probably time to build a banjo. And it took quite a bit of planning and a lot more work than I thought would go into making a banjo.
Well, Huber knows the sound of old banjos because he owns one himself, and he knows that he'll never make one that sounds old, but he's making the closest thing to it I've ever played. And I have a 1942 original flathead 75 that I dearly love, and this is the only new banjo that I would put it down to play. It just has, it's the closest thing to that sound I've ever played in a new banjo.
Well, I knew from the beginning that the banjo had to sound as close to a pre-war as possible. So they're the banjos I pretty much copied, and started with the neck to get the feel of the neck just right, and a good inlay pattern. And then more important really was the tone of the banjo. So we started with the tone ring, of course, and then the fit of the tone ring to the rim, the fit of the neck to the rim, and pretty much making a new banjo with the same quality and the same care as they made the banjos in the 1930s, and copying everything just right. And the result, I think, can be heard. It's a banjo that sounds as close to an old one as I've ever heard.
And it seems that the Banjo Press is in agreement, as evidenced by a recent review in Banjo Newsletter, America's premier banjo magazine in publication since 1973. Their July 2002 issue had this to say.
I have people come up to me at shows and tell me that my old banjo sounded good, and they're very surprised when I tell them I'm not playing an old banjo, that it's a fairly new Huber. And I think that's a testament to the sound of these banjos, that people think that it's an old banjo when they hear it.
So do these new banjos sound as good as pre-war banjos? Well, they don't sound as good as pre-war banjos yet, but I'm very confident that these new Huber banjos sound as good as the pre-war banjos did the day they came off the bench.
At present, there are 4 models available in the Huber, all reminiscent of the classic pre-war flatheads, but still offering a look that is distinctly Huber.
Well, the first banjo I designed was an all-mahogany model, and I named it the Lancaster, and that's based on Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised.
The Lancaster uses choice Honduran mahogany for the neck and resonator, with 2 white double concentric rings inlaid in the back of the resonator. Many players have commented on the attractiveness of the wood in the Lancaster, as the mahogany you find in banjos is often quite plain. Like all the Huber banjos, the Lancaster is made with a Huber pre-war replica tone ring, perfectly fitted to a 3-ply hard rock maple rim. Steve has these rims made using an animal hide glue, just as they were made in the 1930s, rather than with a modern adhesive like other banjo makers currently use. A small detail, perhaps, but The operating principle behind the Huber banjos is to capture every nuance of those older instruments. Not knowing which small details will have an impact on tone, Steve decided to capture as many aspects of the older components of processes as he could. All 4 Huber models use the same fingerboard inlay pattern. The traditional inlay patterns can be substituted as a custom option, such as is shown here on a custom Lancaster. All the Huber necks are exact duplicates made with computer-assisted cutting machines. Steve digitized the neck on one of his old banjos to get the same dimensions, look, and feel in the Huber necks. Careful attention to scale length during the initial programming ensures perfect intonation up and down the neck.
Well, my favorite old banjo is a 1941 5-string flathead, and it has a maple neck and a radiused fingerboard, which I incorporated in the Kalamazoo model that I build now. And I named it the Kalamazoo for the fact that my old banjo was built in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
The Kalamazoo is made with the same mahogany resonator as is used on the Lancaster, with twin concentric purfling rings. The neck is made from a straight-grained maple, though stained to match the mahogany resonator. Some players find that a maple neck offers just a bit more biting tone than mahogany, with somewhat sharper attacks. The headstock overlay features a traditional fleur-de-lis pattern, which extends a simple elegance to the overall design. A radiused fingerboard comes standard on the Kalamazoo and is a custom option on the other models. This gently arched fingerboard is preferred by many players who describe it as more comfortable, especially guitarists, who may find the flat banjo boards to be a bit unwieldy. The Kalamazoo model, Sammy Sheeler's personal banjo, is shown with the finish removed from the back of the neck, sometimes called a speed neck. Though a bit jarring visually, many pickers like the smooth feel of the wood grain against the fingers, and the fact that this finish-free neck doesn't get sticky in warm, humid weather.
I wanted to include a walnut model in my line of banjos because of the burl walnut resonator, which is just a gorgeous piece of wood. And I named this model the Roanoke because Roanoke, Virginia is one of my favorite places in the United States.
The burl walnut resonator is surely the most compelling feature of the Roanoke model, and it's nicely set off by twin concentric rings of multicolored inlaid wood marquetry. The neck is of a straight grain walnut with a natural walnut stain. The Roanoke is a nickel-plated banjo, but this one is shown with optional gold plating, which can be custom ordered on any Huber model. The headstock overlay on the Roanoke is subtly different from that used on either the Lancaster or Kalamazoo, and is slightly more ornate, in keeping with the more dramatic impact of the highly figured walnut resonator. To show that no detail is too small when it comes to Steve's passion for replicating the pre-war specs, the coordinator rods on all Huber banjos are custom manufactured from steel, as they were on the older banjos. Even the brass nuts and washers for the rods and the L brackets that hold the resonator in place are made exactly like those on the pre-wars. Steve even contracted with a company to manufacture the tiny wood screws used to attach the L brackets and the truss rod cover so that he could have them machined as exact pre-war replicas.
Well, some of the most spectacular banjos of the 1930s were the gold-plated engraved models, which featured curly maple resonators, necks, and sunburst, and I wanted to create a model like that to evoke the same beauty and the same feel of the pre-wars, and I call that model the Lexington.
The Lexington is surely the jewel of the Huber line, offering a strikingly beautiful piece of art. It's also a professional quality instrument. All the metal parts are triple gold-plated, using an older immersion plating method without modern brighteners, resulting in a gold finish that is quite similar to look to that used on the pre-war flatheads. The armrest, tailpiece, and hoop are engraved in an intricate pattern that Steve designed especially for this model. The resonator features a hand-rubbed golden sunburst finish, which is a perfect complement to the striking figure of the flaming maple. The neck is stained with a matching shaded maple finish. Gold-plated maple banjos have often been described as having a tonal character unique unto themselves. And the Huber Lexington is no exception. It has a rich, sweet tone with the immediacy of response you associate with maple banjos, and a bit more sustained after the notes are struck. Like the other Huber models, the Lexington is made with a custom fabricated pot metal tension hoop, which is identical in weight, dimensions, and appearance to that used in the pre-wars. All new Huber banjos are guaranteed against defects in materials or workmanship to the original owner without time limit, often described as a limited lifetime warranty. All models are made standard with Brazilian rosewood fingerboards, like the pre-wars, but ebony can be substituted at no extra charge. Through a special arrangement with Remo, Steve installs a head on each Huber banjo that is manufactured to his custom specifications, with a slightly heavier frosting similar to the way the Remo heads were once made as a matter of course. All of the Huber models are made with a 5-ply resonator, unlike the 3-plies that are found in other new banjos. Why is that? The answer is always the same, because that's the way they were made before the war. To create these pre-war replica resonators, Steve had to find a source for veneers of suitable quality, and also build the jigs to glue, clamp, and bend them into shape. All are made with 4 plies of poplar, just as they were in the 30s, with an outer veneer of hardwood. Steve uses poplar for all the inner veneers instead of maple, again in keeping with the pre-war spec. From the beginning, it was decided that Huber banjos would not be made available through dealers, but offered only directly to consumers. This was done in order to offer a clearly superior instrument at prices that were comparable and competitive with what you'd expect to pay for the big-name factory banjos, and to avoid the familiar and somewhat confusing pricing scenario where the instruments are listed at an inflated retail price while they actually sell at a lower, discounted price. Of course, the downside is that it's not easy for a picker to get their hands on one. With this in mind, we've made arrangements with Sammy Sheeler to join in the marketing and distribution of the Huber banjos. Sammy will be playing his Huber on stage at all Lonesome River Band shows, so that you can hear what one sounds like in the hands of a true master. Plus, he'll let anyone pick on it afterward or between shows to get a test drive.
I keep my Huber on the road with me all the time, and I love for people to come up and ask to play it, because I really want people to hear these banjos, and I've always got one with me. They're welcome to check it out at any time at a live show the Lonesome River Band does, and compare it to what you play now, and decide for yourself what you think.
In order to keep Steve focused where his skills are best utilized, making banjos, all ordering and customer service is handled through AccuTab Publications. John Lawless at AccuTab will be happy to answer any questions you might have about pricing, ordering details, or delivery times. The Huber banjos are essentially made to order, so delivery is dependent on the volume of orders in the shop at the time a new order is placed. We invite you to visit the Huber banjos website to see, read, and hear more about these fine instruments. You can contact AccuTab by phone or email if you'd like to receive a free copy of the Huber banjos catalog.